Here we have some pointers on how to install the Vintage Vibe damper kit. We're going to start with this Rhodes over here that has original dampers on it. And you basically want to take a nice fresh blade. I usually pull on the original damper and just get right underneath it, kind of a little sawing motion, and take the old dampers right off. About like that is sufficient. You can have it about that clean. Something like this, for instance, we would definitely want to go over that and clean it up a little more before gluing new dampers on. Now, when installing your new dampers, I like to start at the treble and work my way down toward the bass. Depending on where your strike line is, you may want to bend the treble dampers down slightly so that way the damper felt clears the pickup. You could do that kind of just by taking the pliers here, a pair of pliers, and just sort of bending down a little bit. And that little flat tab there, that's where we're going to put our treble damper. And we take our glue here, get a small bead on that glue to appear, just about like that. Make sure it's not an air bubble. And just kind of cut it off, just like that. And then we go ahead with our treble damper, and it's going to go this way, so that way it's shorter rather than flipping it. And it doesn't matter if we orient it this way or that way. If the glue starts to fall as it is, we'll just catch it and then just sort of bend it up and make sure it's nice and tight on there. And there we go, is our first damper. Next in line is the mid-range dampers. So we'll just, for the sake of the video, pretend we put our treble dampers all the way on and move down the piano. One thing we really want to mention about the mid-range and the pre-mid-range dampers, and this goes for the bass dampers as well. If you look closely, I'll put this damper right on the edge of that key there. There's a grain to this damper. Now, if we look at the felt, it actually has a grain. We can see it moving horizontally, whereas if I were to put it this way, now we can see that the damper is vertical. The grain of it is vertical. We want to orient the felt with the grain horizontal. This is going to give you a nice stop on the note, but without a kind of a chirping sound. If you put the damper this way, it's a little harder to the tine, and you'll get a chirp on release. So, in the same fashion, we'll just do one right here. We know a mid's going to end up in this area. There's 21 treble, so we would go 21 down, and then we would start with our mid-range dampers. And again, we get our bead of glue. Now see, there's an air bubble in there, so just make sure you have enough glue. And just, again, put a small bead on there. And with our damper grain positioned correctly, what I like to do is kind of line up with the edge of the damper and just sort of push this way. This way, most of your excess glue is going to end up in front of the damper felt. And then just sort of clean off the excess there. And we could go ahead and do a pre-mid damper. And again, we're going to observe the grain on the damper, and we want to see that grain is horizontal. So about in this section we'd encounter some pre-mid dampers. As the damper gets a little larger, the felt, you can put a little more glue on there. And again, just sort of roll it forward. And give it a good press. You don't want to press all the glue out of there, but make sure it's nice and tight on the aluminum damper arm. And then finally we come to the bass dampers. And again, our grain is going to be horizontal. Okay, we'll do this one at the end here. Nice bead of glue. And there goes the damper right on there. We just wanted to point out that our damper kit comes pre-numbered. So when you start at your treble, you'll use all 21, and that's going to bring you right about to this particular note here, which is numbered 60 on this particular piano. Then you have your mid-range, which is 22 of those, is going to bring you roughly to about B flat. Then our pre-mid, 15 of those, and then finally your bass dampers. Okay, earlier when we were putting the treble dampers on, I showed you how you can do a little bend in the damper arm to allow clearance for the felt to get around the pickup. Here's our bend in the damper arm, the felt on top of it, and we'll just lower the harp here and kind of demonstrate to you how, see how the damper felt is able to get right around the pickup without binding on it. So we have a nice positive damper there. On the bass side of things, I want to show you a little way we can possibly optimize, or at least get the dampers to really fall out of the way of the swinging tine. With our key depressed, if we bend this tine down, kind of mimicking the swing of it, we can actually see that the tine isn't quite parallel with the angle of that damper there. So in other words, on a hard blow, this tine is actually going to get damped by the damper, right in that corner there. Now, the way we can get around that, I usually just take my fingernail in here, grab the damper, and just sort of bend up, right in that area. And now we'll bend back down to get to the proper height. Okay. Now upon a heavy blow, it's a little bit more in line with the angle of the tine. So it actually keeps that damper out of the way upon hard blows. Another point we want to make about installing the dampers is what we refer to as lost motion. A Rhodes action is very bouncy. You can probably see those hammers bouncing up and down in there upon blowing the tines. If your dampers don't have any lost motion, then that bounce is going to translate into the tone of the piano. And you'll hear it, instead of stopping dead, it's kind of got almost like a delay effect to it. So we like to put into the dampers about an 1/8 inch of lost motion. So we'll bring the camera up here and demonstrate what that is. See, if I lift this tine up, we can see the damper raised by about let's say an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch or so. Too much lost motion and you won't get a nice open tone. Too little lost motion and you'll hear that bounce. So you'll come across a happy medium for your piano, generally about that measurement though. And so as we press the keys down slightly, this damper is still engaged to the tine and then finally starts to fall away. And that, again, is just going to absorb some of that bouncing tone. Okay, so just to go over the damper adjustment slightly, what we want to do is you'd set up maybe one note in your bass, one in your mid-range, one in the treble, and ideally we want to see a fairly straight line across the dampers. To get the most out of your adjustments, you'll want to bend just ahead of where the bridle strap is fastened to the damper arm. So if we needed to lower this, we'd bend it kind of like that, and our bend is sort of right just ahead of that bridle strap area. If we needed to bring this back up, then again the same applies. And there we are, just roughly about back where we started from. Another note about lost motion is you want to have that lost motion across the entire piano. You may need to back off of lost motion or have less of it in the bass section. That's where things are, so much larger. There's a larger swing of the tine, so you really have to optimize and be able to get that damper as far out of the way as possible. But you can see across the board here, if we lift the harp slightly, you can see the dampers are still engaged up until a certain point and then finally lift off. And that's what we're looking for. You'll also know you have a decent amount of lost motion if you observe the bridle straps. They should have a little slack in them.